And just like that, I have a reason to talk about someone else's grief and not just my own, which makes me incredibly excited because I'm always trying to walk that impossible fine line of humanizing grief by telling my own anecdotes, but also making it abundantly clear that my experiences are not the monolith for everyone that's ever grieved or ever will grieve. I'm Lauren-Blair Donovan, and this is Good Grief, the series where I try to humanize and normalize a dialogue about grieving because we're all going to lose people, and it's just silly that we don't talk about death and the heavy feelings that come with it enough. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that And Just Like That is the new series or next chapter in the Sex and the City franchise. Now, it is very polarizing, and I am not going to be commenting on all the things of the things because that would be a 5-hour-long video. Although I think it's possible the series might be slightly getting better, I will be the first to admit that during the entire pilot, the first episode, I was like, so fear not, I probably agree with a lot of your critiques. If you are someone who's critiquing the show, I probably agree with most critiques, at least on some level. What I will be talking about, though, is the grief of one of the main characters. I will give a countdown for you to get lost when I'm going to start saying spoilers. As somebody who has lost a lot of important people to me, and as somebody who talks about grief a lot, I think it's cool that they're actually exploring how this character is grieving in the series, and it's not just a very special episode. I'm also someone that loves to lurk around Reddit to take like a room temperature check, if you will, to see if my opinions are in the majority versus minority of anything that could be happening at any given time. I'm a little surprised, and yet not at all, at some of the comments that people have on how this character is grieving. I guess I'm surprised because to me, this feels normal, but I guess I'm not surprised because we don't talk about grief as a culture. So no wonder people are alarmed at maybe some behaviors that they're not seeing on screen. That's kind of what I'm getting at. So with all the critiques of And Just Like That, and again, many are very valid, I thought it'd be cool to kind of go off topic of the stuff that people are talking about and discuss how this character is grieving, and I can kind of go to bat for this character because I think it's a lot more normal or acceptable or whatever you want to call it than some people are giving it credit for. Now, I am filming this January 10th, and I am intending to release it within the next day or two, so the 11th, 12th, 13th at the latest is when this is going to come out, which means that there has been 6 episodes of this series. The 7th is coming out 3 days after I film this. So this video could age slightly strangely depending on what happens throughout the rest of the first season and how we put together all the moving parts of all the mechanics of this character's grief. That said, I am observing some standalone incidents that I think are kind of evergreen points that I'm going to be making. So I can't imagine the root of what I'm trying to say is going to age poorly, but depending on what else happens with these characters and in this show, I'm not responsible. I've seen 6 episodes in real time. That's how many have been released. Fingers crossed, it doesn't make a mockery out of me. All right, so if you don't want things spoiled, here's the countdown. Get lost. This is what I'm going to talk about, what happens. So 5, 4, 3, seriously, go watch it and then come back if you don't want it ruined. 2, 1, Mr. Big dies, leaving Carrie a widow. As I mentioned in Reddit, people are kind of not totally buying Carrie's grief from her husband passing. And frankly, I think they're kind of grief shaming her. I'm not really sure that's a term, but if I've invented it, yeah, it is now. And if it's already out there, it should be a word. Grief shaming is real because people expect grief to be one way when really it can be a multitude of different ways. Now, I have a lot of thoughts on the funeral episode. It's actually the one I feel the most negative or maybe apathetic about, but I'm going to circle back to that. We'll talk about that episode after I defend a lot of her grieving for the other episodes, and then we'll come back before final thoughts and talk about the funeral episode. And of course, I, on record, have questions, concerns, thoughts on why she did not call 911, but like right away, but I digress. So starting in the 3rd episode, When in Rome, Carrie can't sleep. And I felt seen, okay? Because I didn't have insomnia every night after my mom died, but I definitely had it, strangely enough, every single Thursday. Every single Thursday the summer my mom died. Why Thursdays? I don't know. Did she die on a Thursday? No, she died on a Wednesday. So why Thursdays? No idea. It's a mystery of life. Like clockwork, I'd either wake up between 1 and 3 in the morning and not be able to go back to bed. But for one reason or another, not sleeping instead of crying after someone dies is one of the more common symptoms. I think I even said that in my weird symptoms of grief video, which I will link in the description. But not sleeping, whether it's because you have too much on your plate, emotionally speaking, as well as just having a lot of emotional energy and heightened emotions that might be not getting out, because it's really common to go into autopilot after someone dies where you don't really feel a lot, but your brain is in overdrive processing everything, which is part of why you go numb and go into autopilot. Without those emotions and energies having a place to go, your brain might get like kind of screwed up and want to be up all night. It's counterintuitive. You would think you would just want to sleep everything off, but not sleeping is a terribly way too true symptom of grief that I think, especially in the early months, it's more common to not sleep or not eat, or other basic functionality can sometimes go a little out the window over crying all the time. To each their own, everyone's different, but this is weirdly common and a huge symptom of grief. This episode also handled Carrie's fixation on Natasha, as well as Big's dog, Goji, that she never even heard of. Look, I don't want to wade too deep into the Natasha waters because there's a whole sordid history that frankly does not paint Carrie in a great light, and if that's what you're thinking, I get it. I'm on your side. But what I will say regarding Carrie, the character, as a grieving person, I think that this was a device, like a plot or writer's device, to showcase that when someone has recently died, you start to wonder about all the things that you never knew about them. And in a lot of cases, sometimes surprises, good, bad, neutral, big or small, can come out after someone died. And sometimes it's not even news, like someone had an affair, which Big did not, but it was a red herring. It looked like maybe Big and Natasha had at least been in better touch than Carrie thought. If not, maybe we're still connected in some type of way, which again was a red herring. That's not what happened. But I think it was a plot device to show that people do get startling news. People do have to wonder who someone really was, no matter how much they knew someone, no matter how much of their life they shared of someone. Do we ever really know everyone's last thought, feeling, childhood anecdote, childhood pet? Carrie was also having trouble getting into the computer at their house, and I have a friend who's going to be on the next Creepy and Kooky Callie episode where we're in a cemetery, and she talks about how her mom died recently and she couldn't get into half of her mom's accounts that she needed to get into because her mom kept changing the passwords. These are all not just common phenomenons of like wondering or finding out information and then wondering about who someone was or what they were up to, not knowing paperwork or passwords. Things of that nature are so common, and the fixations that we have on them, the agonizing, the neurotic tendencies that can come with that, that's a symptom of grief. Say what you will about Carrie in terms of a lot of what's out there, maybe her not always making selfless decisions in terms of, especially with Natasha. Look, a lot of people call Carrie selfish. That's what I'm beating around the bush trying not to say. I'm not really taking a side either which way. What I am saying is that in this isolated incident, even with a little bit of history of her being impulsive and kind of looking out for herself without always taking into consideration other people's reactions or feelings, the fixation part of it, it's a symptom of grief. She might not be crying, but she's looping and she's looking for solutions in ways that may or may not be the best ways of going about things, fair enough. But guys, it's also a TV show. They wanted an excuse to bring back Natasha. Was it a weird excuse? I kind of think so. It was a little clunky. I think they They live in New York. They're glamorous women. They could have had different run-ins that they could have done. He didn't have to leave her $1 million. I'm not in the writer's room though, so I didn't get to make that call. That all said, I think it's literally just a device, both to bring back Natasha and to showcase how sad you get that you just don't know everything about someone after they die and you realize you never will, even if you kind of shared everything. It's an uncomfortable spot. It's not fun. But in all honesty, the writers could have done us so much dirtier. They could have actually had Big have an affair. They could have had him have had more financial risks, if not debt, that he was hiding behind Carrie's back. He could have been stashing a whole family in Connecticut. This is the stuff that I don't want to say comes out like all the time after someone dies, but I think it happens more than you think. So I think this was the writers weirdly going easy on us, even though it was a little clunky and kind of didn't really go anywhere. I think they were just trying to showcase Carrie having an upset, finding out something she didn't know about him, wondering what else she didn't know about him, without us getting furious as viewers that he has like 3 kids in Connecticut and another wife or something. For what that's worth, we could have had way more to complain about. Just saying. In episode 4, Some of My Best Friends, Carrie had an encounter that was super relatable to me. It's not so much about her grief, but it would feel remiss to not mention it. I've said in past videos that you always low-key are remembering that someone died, even if it's not on the front of your mind, even if you're having a good day. It's like you always have this motor running and it's completely exhausting, and there's always sneak attack things that can remind you in a more overt way that someone died. Like I said, it's always in the back of your head. Sometimes there's just these jarring moments that you're going about your day and you're forced to face head on that someone died. Sometimes their favorite song plays on the radio. Sometimes you go somewhere just wanting a cup of coffee and someone asks about your husband or the person who you lost, and you have to inform them that that person died. It sucks. And the man was so lovely. The exchange was so lovely. And I think 9 times out of 10, it goes something exactly like what was portrayed. But growing up in a small town, I couldn't just run to the general store, tell me you're from historic Pennsylvania without telling me you're from historic Pennsylvania. Couldn't go to the general store to just get milk for my cereal without the cashier asking how my family was doing in the wake of my dad passing. So it's not a symptom of grief per se, but it is kind of just a drive-by incident that's a relatively normal occurrence after someone dies. Even in this age of digital technology where it's way more common for people to read on Facebook through a post that someone died versus an obituary in the newspaper, you'd be surprised at how sometimes the news just doesn't make it as far as you think it would, or the people like a cashier at a store who likely is not your Facebook friend but is a part of your life, wouldn't get that information. So grief's a lot of heavy lifting. It doesn't end for a while because it's a lot of reminders, a lot of firsts, and a lot of announcements that have to come with grief, which makes it really exhausting at times. So personally, I'm glad that they added that because it's just a really real, that was the most real scenario regarding the death plot that I've seen so far. Way more realistic than her not calling 911. I'll say it again. One of the reasons that I think grief is so misunderstood is that we don't actually have a lot of accurate representation about it in media. I think some movies perhaps handle death in a more realistic way, but at the same token, most movies are 90 minutes long. So it's still going to be a montage of the greatest hits of grief. At the end of the day, it's really just going to be a snapshot. Until probably the past decade or so, television shows tended to solve everything in 30 minutes or less. And maybe it was a very special episode where it would be a cliffhanger over 2 episodes, but the point still remains. Whatever was going on in those very special episodes would be solved in 30 minutes or less, even if somebody died. It might be referenced once later in the season or the next season, but generally speaking, next episode, they'd be back at school, they'd be back at work, they'd be back complaining about trivial things. It would generally not be I'm still sad or tired or mad or just not feeling like myself because so-and-so died. It's like, welp, how do we get out of doing the homework assignment? It's no wonder we're clueless about what grieving really looks like, because usually in those episodes or movies, you see a lot of tears because that's just good drama. That's ratings. That's butts in seats. Like, everyone loves human melodrama, or at least they like to watch it. But the reality is, which I think this series is doing a good job at tackling, is that it's not just the hysterics. It's not just the melodrama. It's not even just tears. It's walking around endlessly and aimlessly because you have energy and nowhere to go and don't really want to go anywhere, but you can't sit still and you just need to walk. Sometimes it's not being able to sleep. Sometimes it's making impulsive decisions because you're so sleep deprived and emotionally spent that you're gonna DM your husband's ex-wife on Instagram. Not 100% defending that. I'm just trying to humanize people are not their best selves when they're grieving. Those are all really realistic representations of grief. And we're only 2 episodes into me analyzing this in. So Carrie wants to sell her apartment that she had with Big, and it seems like she did. I have a lot of mixed thoughts on that. It's something that I only want to tread lightly on because despite how much I have been through and how many people I have lost, I, knock on wood, have yet to be a widower. So I don't want to be too much of an expert on something that I don't have business really commenting on. But what I will say is that I think it's a pretty well-known fact that the rule of thumb is don't make any huge life decisions like selling your place that you shared with your spouse for at least a year until after they died. And the reason being is because it generally takes a year to grieve. It's not a perfect science. I got a video about that too. I'll link it. But it's a rule of thumb for a reason. And no matter how well you're dealing with your emotions, and no matter how open you are to working through your emotions, and no matter what good fortune helps make the year easier that you may or may not go through, you're probably still not going to be living your best life, and you're still going to be readjusting and recalibrating and finding your new normal. So big decisions, not a good idea. I have witnessed almost every widow that I know desperately want to sell the house within really just a few months after someone dies. I don't think it's the greatest idea, but I do respect that it seems to be an itch that widowers seem to have almost universally. So I don't want to, that's part of why I don't want to comment on it too much. Most do not actually sell the house, and I'm glad that they don't. But ooh, that itch, it burns for a second where they really do consider it. I can appreciate that it's probably really hard to be in a place that used to be home that no longer feels like home, but you also don't know where you're going to land in the future. The reality you feel while you're grieving is not the reality for the rest of your life. And once you sell a place, you can't really go back. So maybe don't get rid of things until you've had time to settle to know if you want something back or not, like the dwelling you shared with your loved one. And before we move on to episode 5 regarding Seema breaking on accident Carrie's picture frame, look, it's really easy to be irrational about tangible things like objects after someone dies. I got weirdly territorial and sentimental about all kinds of material things that I would not have cared nearly as much about in normal times in my life after someone died. I don't know if I ever flipped out that way. I don't know, even if anything got broken, I'm failing to remember an instance where I completely relate to exactly what happened with Carrie and Seema, but the emotion, the words out of her mouth rang true for me. And again, you don't have to like Carrie, but I pretend Carrie's not Carrie. Pretend she's just a grieving character that you don't know anything from the canon of Sex and the City. That could happen to the best of us, is what I'm trying to say. Again, it's not all tears. Grief is really irrational. Grief is really emotional, even without tears. Grief can be very reactional, A lot of the Reddit comments are about how she's not being emotional enough. Not all emotion is obvious sadness or even obvious anger. But Carrie freaking out about the picture frame breaking, that's her expressing a deep pain over a deep loss. It's not tears, but she's in pain. She is 100% in pain. In episode 5, Tragically Hip, we have Carrie relying on her friends because she needs a hip surgery. And again, people have commented on how maybe Carrie relies on her friends too much, and we're not going to go into that because we're going to stay on topic here. But here's the thing. Pretend it's not Carrie. Any human, whether they're amazing in life or whether they suck at life, we are all people who need help. And sometimes we need more help depending on the circumstances. Fictitious Carrie represents real people going through losses and having a health crisis not long after. That can 100% happen. That does happen to people. 100%. If your health changes and you no longer have your partner, whether it's through a death or a divorce or a breakup, and if your family is not in the picture for whatever the reason, estrangement, distance, death, doesn't matter, you're going to need your friends. You're going to need your friends. As someone who has been in similar positions as Carrie, in the sense of I've had a boatload of health issues, and I've also been very alone in this life. I have had moments of being single and grieving, and life just not catching up to maybe help fill in some of the voids that I've lost. Friends have, at moments in my life, probably more moments than I'm comfortable with, have been my moon and stars. And that's just my lot in life. So some of these comments about how she was relying on her friends, those triggered me. The rest didn't. I'm used to grief not being understood, but I think the role of friendships is also misunderstood. My most recent Good Grief video was about grief and friendships. And I said that I think we as a culture also have a confusing definition of friendships, in that everyone has a different definition and everyone has different needs that they need from their friends, and everyone has different love languages and so on and so forth. I can link that too. You can talk about pulling yourself up by the bootstraps all day, every day. And there's times where that phrase exists for a reason, but also life is really hard and we're social animals and it's a social world. We need help sometimes. We are animals and we need some form of a pack. If you don't have a family or you don't have a romantic partner, and especially if you just lost your romantic partner or family or whomever would be taking care of you in a certain situation, I hope you have friends. I hope you have good friends. Are you kidding me? This is a complaint people are making? Who doesn't want good friends that will help them? Who doesn't want to be a good friend that will help their friends? And even if she hired a nurse to take care of her, which I guess could have happened, she'd still need to connect with her friends. Like, they'd still hopefully be checking in on her and popping by and calling. And, you know, guys, friendship is a good thing. Like, it's a good thing. Like, boundaries are fine. Trust me, I have them. Like, I wouldn't want my friends sleeping in my bed after the loss of someone I love. That doesn't mean that that's wrong, like what Carrie and her friends are doing. That's amazing. I don't think that would be for me though. But candidly speaking, I wish I had more people, even though my friends have been amazing and some way better than others, I wish I had a small pack of people that coordinated and consistently checked in on me, especially after the times that my parents died, but also even years later, because that's a compounding life event that changes you and can sometimes be triggering in its own ways, or depending on what else is happening in life. It's a scary world out there. I'm not mad at Carrie for having people take care of her. I think it's actually a really good thing. I'm glad she has people that are not going to make her, feel like a burden, because we all deserve that. Especially if we've had like a 1-2 punch, like your husband dying and needing hip surgery. Like, Reddit, calm down. Let the girl have a bad year. Like, this is her get out of jail free card. Maybe stuff in the past she's done isn't, but this is it. Who hurt you, Reddit? Seriously. In episode 6, Dwally, we have Carrie in a new place. She's not necessarily loving. And I think this is actually kind of a metaphor. I don't think you have a home when you're grieving. And what I mean by that is you can literally be living in the same spot you were as when someone died. But I think we are all our own homes. Meaning, if we're sick or unhappy, no matter where we are, we're going to be uncomfortable. We are the main home, no matter where our home is. And I think, and this is sort of why they say maybe don't make huge real estate decisions within the first year after a death, but I think that you have Carrie searching for the new identity and perhaps rushing it because she's just trying to get into a new place and not live in the place that she lived in with her husband, but also not live into the place that she weirdly held on to for well over a decade. I genuinely don't know why that is, but she doesn't want to go back to her pre-big life either. So I think she's trying to find what the next phase is, and that's actually admirable. But grief is a process. Grief takes a while. Finding the new normal takes a while. You're not going to be home again for a hot minute, and that sucks. That's one of the more painful parts of grief, just how uncomfortable it is and how you just don't feel good. Like, living doesn't feel good. It's uncomfortable. And this is a hard episode for me to watch because this is a symptom of grief. It's not obvious tears again, but it is just that stillness, that uncomfortability in the quiet, in the cold, sterile new home that she's in. Whether that's a literal experience for everyone or not, that feeling, there's a lot of nuance and subtext in it that is how it feels to grieve. And the fact that there's a beeping noise that she doesn't know where it's coming from, that would drive me insane anyway. But also, I think it's a continuation of the metaphor that you're just not going to feel at home for a while after someone dies. You're going to be in limbo for a while. No amount of haircuts or positive thinking or literal moving into new places are going to make you feel at home, aka at peace, for a long time. And it's no fun. Like, I see you if that's what you're going through. It sucks. It does end, but grief takes a while. And I'm so sorry for that. What I do love about this episode is that you do see Carrie cry again. And while obviously I've been the biggest proponent of grief is not just about tears, it is a part of it for most people. What I like about it coming in this episode, it happens in the storage unit when she's going through old belongings of Charlotte, and I can't quite peg where the series is because I keep kind of moving forward in a way that my brain just doesn't want to do the math about, but I think it's minimum 4 months after Big died and maximum maybe 8 months, so I think around 6 maybe, give or take, and autopilot wears off after a few months. I cried way more 3 to 6 months after my mom died than I did the first 3 months after she died. I cried once. You are often in autopilot the first few months because you have so much you need to process. The fact that someone dies, you have paperwork to do, you have a funeral to plan. It's almost like your brain shuts down the ability to feel all the emotions, but a few months later, it starts to seep out. Also, when someone first dies, you're imagining what it's like to live without them, even though they're already dead, because you haven't really lived it. A day later, a week later, it's still a really hypothetical thing. You haven't done the holidays. You haven't had a surgery. You haven't met new friends that they're never going to meet. There's just certain things that take a while to process because at first they're hypothetical, but then they become reality. Whether it's 4 months, whether it's 6 months, whether it's 9 months after Mr. Big died, Carrie having an emotional breakdown in a storage unit checks out. There's enough distance for her to feel what it's like to live life without her husband. She's at that exact cross point. And it makes sense that objects would bring this out of her because I find objects to be really triggering. I actually don't keep a lot of photos of my dead loved ones, my parents, my friends, any other relatives out and about, because if I'm having a bad day and I come home, it feels emotional. It feels weirdly mocking, like I'm never going to get a win in life, which is dark, but welcome to my world. I also always know that they're dead somewhere in the back of my head, and sometimes I just want to have a day of normalcy where it's not in the front of my head. Photos are hard. I have a million of them, and they're locked away in trunks that I can look at when I choose to, so I don't feel ambushed by them. But when I go through my trunks, which also have a lot of childhood artifacts that I don't know if I want to hold on to or not, but I like having them for now because it's Look, my life changed a lot after my dad died, and I like having artifacts that prove my life used to be different, but going through them is emotional. I also have a lot of belongings that were my mom's that also I don't really know if I want to keep for forever, but I have not been in a state to decide that for various reasons. So they're locked away in trunks. And when I go through that, there's no way that nostalgia does not hit me. It's not like I cry all these years later, but oh my God, within the first months after my mom died, hell yeah, I cried. And there's still, to this day, a really heavy emotional response I get. It can be bittersweet. It's not necessarily bad, but objects can kind of transport you to a different time. So I'm not surprised that so many months later, objects triggered Carrie to have the emotion that seems to be the emotion that Reddit only accepts as grief. Crying is a part of grief. I'm never going to say otherwise, but it's not the only part. And I frankly love that they waited several episodes to show her crying again, because that really was actually my experience, and I've talked to other people and it was their experience too. Doesn't mean that anything's wrong with you if you're crying every day, every month, every week. Some people do get it out of their systems within the first 6 months, and the second 6 months are easier. It's not a monolith, but Carrie represents a lot of people grieving, and it's not being portrayed unrealistically. It's being portrayed in a way that a lot of people would relate to. And finally, going back to episode 2, Little Black Dress. I saved it for last because it's the one I have the most issue with. Parts of it got things right, like Carrie being so out of it that she's not even realizing what Miranda's asking her in the kitchen. That's memory and just being zoned out and not really hearing what people are saying, especially right after someone dies. That was bullseye accurate. It's also accurate, since you're in autopilot, that someone next to you who's maybe less close to the tragedy, like if you're the wife and then your friend Charlotte, who's a friend of your husband, but just a friend, yeah, that actually tracks, that she was way more emotional than Carrie. Sometimes the further you are from something, the emotions come quicker and bigger, because I don't know why that is. I have thoughts, but I probably won't say it accurately, so I'll let it go. But it's incredible. There were tons of people I had to comfort after my parents died. And me and my brother were the closest to her, so that made no sense. Same with my dad. There were also people that had just bigger reactions to different things. You're also gonna have people saying, yeah, really tone deaf things at funerals. I need to do a video on that one of these days, because it's a hoot and a holler, let me tell you what. I mean, it's not fun in the moment, but it's real fun to reminisce about. The reason why I didn't like this episode though, look, the thing with me is, like, I only cry with media about deaths, like funerals or finding a body, which is, I did discover my dad's body, things of that nature, if it's done in a way that feels or reads accurately to me. I was made of stone in this episode. It did nothing for me emotionally. I think it was really wooden. I do love that they made Carrie be kind of a zombie. I think that is closer to reality than her being hysterical. I think she would be in shock, and she would just be concerned about wanting to do right by Big. I think Sarah Jessica Parker is a wonderful actress, so I think she acted it well. I don't know if it was like the pacing. I don't know if it was the directing. I don't know if it was the writing. Something about the episode just didn't land with me. It felt like it was more fixated on the glamour of the funeral than the... They could have had... Look, it's their show. I don't want to do the gross thing where I try to rewrite the show. It felt like they could have gotten more miles comedically out of the tense things that can happen at funerals. And it also was just very confusing to my brain to be like, oh, Big has a brother, apparently, that we've never met. And I didn't really get the issue with the first funeral home. Growing up in small town Pennsylvania, we chose the local funeral home. I didn't realize you could be picky about funeral homes. So I didn't, just because I didn't personally resonate doesn't mean that there aren't other people that, you know, would be like, yeah, I hated X, Y, and Z funeral home because of the decor, so I went to a different one. I'm just also not convinced that Mr. Big would want a minimalist white room, modern art kind of funeral like that. It was a choice, guys. It was a choice. So it felt really wooden to me, but that's not to discredit that the episode got some things right, because it did. And I also don't want to discredit the idea that I like the fact that Carrie was a zombie. It just, something about it was wooden to me. I didn't get triggered. I didn't have a cry. Take or leave that. That was the most confusing episode to me, but the rest haven't made me cry per se. I don't think they were supposed to, but they hit different nerves in a way that made me feel seen. This was just, I don't know. Maybe I was still trying to figure out the whole series too, because there's a lot to unpack in this series that we're not going to go into in this video. But for whatever the reason, the funeral episode was the least realistic, even though I'm actually going to bat for a lot of the things in it. Just something about it was too wooden for me to care that much, as cold as that sounds. So, and just like that is doing some things questionably, some things probably totally wrong, but I don't think that they're handling Carrie's grief wrong. I don't. Not only is there not an incorrect way to grieve, but I think that she's not even doing it in a way that's alien to a lot of people. Thank goodness a lot of Reddit commenters are saying, hey, there is no wrong way to grieve, or hey, this was like me. Because it's not all tears. I cannot say that enough. As much as I wouldn't mind one more tear episode, I'm glad that most were not. Because sometimes you're also just too busy to cry. Life goes on. You have doctor appointments, you have errands, you have friends that you need to keep up with, and you're going to want to have fun. You're going to want to have things to look forward to. You're going to need to eat at some point. Like, whether people realize it or not, and I'm saying this in the context of I'm not shaming anyone, but it's a learning moment, but like, it's abusive to tell someone that the love of their life died, so how dare they not do anything but feel terrible 24 hours a day and not leave bed and just cry and cry and cry and cry. Like, that's abusive. It really is. First of all, you should never dictate how someone handles an intense emotional experience. That's gaslighty, worst case scenario, and alienating, best case scenario, if not belittling. But pain is often invisible, and that doesn't make it any less valid. Just because someone doesn't seem angry or sad or some other big emotion, it does not mean that it's not a river in winter underneath with who knows what and how deep negative emotions swirling underneath it. If you're in pain, good for you if you have friends. Good for you if you're making new friends. Good for you if you're working on goals, ridiculous or not, like walking in heels again. We need things to look forward to when we're sad. I'm always going to root for someone grieving, fictitious or not. I think we hold a lot of fictitious characters to higher standards than we hold ourselves to, or even the people in our lives. Nobody is perfect, but I think it's easier to get mad at fictitious characters or think that they're insane or think that they're not doing life correctly, because we can't always be mad at ourselves, and we can't always be mad at our best friends or family or partners who are helping us, but they have traits that drive us crazy. I think we funnel a lot of our frustrations into fictitious characters. And in this case, I think it's only getting compounded by the fact that grief is so misunderstood, and Carrie's already kind of a polarizing character. People either strongly identify with her and think that they are her, or especially in recent years, see her as problematic and tone deaf and selfish. So I think the people in the latter lane are, if they don't understand grief, they're really throwing the tomatoes at her. And I don't really care if you like Carrie or not. That's not my job to persuade you or be on your side, not in this video. But I think it's a perfect storm of a disaster. But I'm going to call out the perfect storm that I think is happening here. You don't have to like the show, you don't have to like Carrie, but I think this is a weirdly accurate portrayal of grief, and I'm thankful for at least that representation. I wish they went deeper into it, honestly, and that doesn't mean more tears, but I wish we had the voiceover maybe to explain her feelings a bit more, or there was some more overt conversations about what she's feeling versus nuanced things we're supposed to read into. Maybe that would be enough for an audience to understand better. But I also understand that there's a lot of characters in the show and they're trying to tackle a lot of different issues and there's a lot of other plots going on. So I don't think And Just Like That is supposed to be a show about grief. I think this is just one particular character's storyline. But I'll take it because it's more realistic than it could have been, for sure. What are your thoughts? Have you grieved? Do you recognize any of your grief in Carrie? Do you think I am completely off base? Have you grieved and you still don't find Carrie's grief realistic? As long as you're kind, leave a comment. Let's have a dialogue because that's the whole point of this series. Trying to just normalize grief and the feelings that come with it and death and loss and all the things of all those things. Everyone's experiences are valid, including fictitious characters that may or may not be a little self-involved. I'm Lauren-Blair Donovan. Please hit subscribe if you don't already subscribe. If you like the video, please like the video, leave a comment. I've already said that. Catch me on social media, Blairosaurus_Rex on both Instagram and TikTok, and Blairosaurus Rex on Twitter. I have a lot of fun stuff coming out in 2022 on the social medias, on this channel, not just griefy stuff, not just deathy stuff. So definitely please hit subscribe. I'm very excited for Hardy Har Har comedy in 2022. I will catch you guys next time. Bye.